Well, a very good evening to all of you. As you can see, I am currently not at the building. Mississippi has recently been put under a stay-at-home warning ban, however you might call it. And of course, tonight's Wednesday night, and the night we would commonly come together and have Bible study. Apologies for the rather seismic activity in my screen. Um, Due to being at home and my house being thankfully full of people, outside is the quietest place to be able to record. But I'm happy to be doing this for you, with you. Happy to be studying tonight with you. On our Wednesday night study, we were in the book of Exodus, and we want to continue that study this evening with Exodus chapter 15. If you have a Bible, I encourage you to turn along with us. The study tonight will not be as long as the study last week. The text sort of lends itself tonight to a little bit of a shorter study. The way we study the Bible needs to be according to the way the Bible's written. If we arbitrarily try to break the Bible into 1-hour blocks, that's not the way the Bible was written. It wasn't written in neat 1 hour or 45-minute or even 30-minute segments. It's written to be read and to be heard aloud. And so we want to study it tonight. I'll be sharing with you some of the info that was with our members that's in our class material, and just have a little bit shorter of a study this evening. And when you see the text, hopefully you'll be able to see what I mean by that. Also doing this by recording this by way of Zoom. We will be looking forward to having some Zoom meetings here soon as we get that software sort of distributed and get everybody online and on board and downloaded and that sort of thing. My daughter's trying to come out to see what's going on. Exodus chapter 15 is where we'll be studying this evening. And as we study here tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you two different documents. The first will be where we're at in our text, and hopefully you'll be able to see that shortly. That should be right where you're able to see it there on my left or your right. I can't tell which. Exodus 15 and verse 22. Now, we led into this chapter with the Song of the Sea, the song that Moses and Israel sang in celebration and in victory as the Lord had delivered them from the hand of the Egyptians. And in this segment of the text from Exodus 15:22 all the way really to chapter 19 is the account of Israel sort of between Egypt and Sinai. Mount Sinai marks the next big milestone in the book of Exodus. Before we get to Sinai, we get to learn a little bit more about the Israelites, and we get to learn a lot about the Lord. We get to learn about how he delivers his people, how he interacts with them, what he expects of them. And in a lot of ways, this first segment from 15:22, sorry, the verse divisions aren't actually on the one that I have on screen. This is the version of Exodus that we're studying from for our class, maybe a little bit closer to the original, as the original did not have verse divisions, but it also makes it rather troublesome when you're trying to tell exactly what verse you're talking about. Exodus 15:22 down through verse 27, really through the end of the chapter. When they begin this journey to Mount Sinai, we got to understand Exodus many times stops and gives us summaries. It gives us demonstrations on what is about to happen. And then after that, we get examples. We get sort of a summary statement and then examples. The book starts this way. We have a summary basically from the 70 that enter that enter Egypt, all the way to they've multiplied greatly and now they're several 100,000 people. We get these big summaries. And we get a summary of what happened to them. At the end of chapter 2, we get a summary of what has been going on in Egypt. Long story short, they are groaning because of their enslavement. We get summaries, in particular, at the end of chapter 6. Chapters 3 through 6 really outline the interaction between Moses and the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, sent Moses to Egypt. Moses balked at that famously. And that's sort of the summary you get at the end of chapter 6. Here at the beginning of this section following the Song of the Sea, we get a summary in a lot of ways of what the Lord is going to do for them headed to Sinai, and then a larger summary of what the Lord is going to do for Israel as they head on into Canaan. In a lot of ways, this describes what's going to happen in the next few chapters and in the next 3 books of the Bible. Exodus 15 and verse 22. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, "If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. So how is this a summary of what is about to happen? Notice the similarities between what happens really from verse 22 down to verse 27, the end of the chapter, and what's going to happen in the immediate future. They're going into the wilderness. This is not the only time they're going to run out of water. In fact, the next story in the text describes how they don't have bread. One of the stories following is how they don't have water. This not having what they need is going to repeat itself. So we get an instance of that. They couldn't drink the water, and so they grumbled against Moses. This isn't the only time they're going to grumble. They've been grumbling, sometimes justified and sometimes unjustified, against the Lord. Or I said that poorly. It's never justified to be grumbling against the Lord. They've been crying out throughout the book of Exodus, sometimes for various reasons. But here, the people grumble against Moses. Guess what's going to happen at least twice before they reach Mount Sinai? They're going to grumble against the Lord. What is going to happen repeatedly between this point and the crossing of the Jordan where they enter Canaan? Grumbling, and grumbling is going to get them in a lot of trouble. In this case, at the end of Exodus 15, they cry against Moses. They've been doing that already in the book. They're going to continue doing it, and they're going to do it in the books that follow. Whoever the leader is from God, God's people, regrettably, grumble against them. It is not something we should just say, "Oh, well, and let's deal with it," but we need to understand that. He cried to the Lord. The Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Notice the miraculous intervention on behalf of God's people. The next story in the text is about the bringing of manna, the miraculous bread from heaven, and quail to boot. Repeatedly in the text, Israel doesn't have water. 2 times it's brought from a rock. At one time, Moses struck the rock when he was supposed to speak to it. In times of war, the Lord intervenes for them miraculously. All over the text, in Exodus and onward, the Lord's going to interact in a miraculous way for his people. The Lord is going to make for them statutes and rules. Exodus 19, we're going to arrive at Mount Sinai. Exodus 20 is the beginning of the law, beginning with the 10 Commandments. The Lord is going to make for them statutes and rules. He has already done this in the book of Exodus. He's already given them instructions regarding Passover and when to leave and those sorts of things. He is going to test them throughout the book. Deuteronomy recounts this well in Deuteronomy 6, how God tested his people. And what was the test? If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes and give ear to his command, you get the idea. If you listen, if you do, if you give ear, if you keep. Okay, this reminds us strongly of James chapter 2. Do not be a hearer of the word, but a doer. What good is it if you hear, paraphrasing, and you don't do? It's like looking in the mirror and not caring what you see back and going on about your business. Nothing has changed if you refuse to hear and do the word. Israel would have issues with this, as all people have. But we have this summary. Notice the reference to the diseases put on the Egyptians, the curses of the law that are repeated later in the text, in slight form in Exodus and much more deeply in Deuteronomy, are really, in essence, a bringing back of Israel to Egypt. All that I've delivered you from, I'm going to take you back to. If you refuse to hear and do and listen and keep God's law. Hear the reference, I am the Lord, your healer. Healer is a unique reference here, not the only place we find this, but the exact counterpoint to the diseases, or the exact contrast to the diseases of the Egyptians, is the Lord, the healer of diseases. The Lord who prevented the plagues, several of the plagues from entering the land of Goshen. The Lord is the opposite of this, and he wants them in his presence where he can be that healer. Notice here, lastly, the one final connection, both immediately and onward. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. Why do you suppose there are 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees? Those are biblically excellent numbers. We've already seen that with the 12 sons of Jacob. We're going to see that later on in various sorts of ways. The 12 disciples, the 12 all over the place, the Bible has it. 12 and 70. You take two great biblical numbers, 7 and 10, multiply them, you get 70. 12, 7, 10, 70, okay? What's the point? After God's people go through the wilderness, after he intervenes for them, after he sets for them his rules and his statutes, and defines for them clearly their situation before himself, how he is the healer, not the destroyer. But if they would refuse to listen, he would be forced to give them back what they wanted. He's going to bring them to a place of great blessing, great providence, 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. This is the every man under his fig tree, every man under his grapevine. They're going to camp there by the water. No greater place can you be than in God's good presence. If you're Israel, camp by the water. Everything's provided for, all is well. Instead of being by the river of Egypt, they're going to be by the river of the Lord, in a place of great blessing. This story really serves as a beautiful summary of what's going to happen in Israel's immediate future in terms of they're headed to Sinai in a lot of ways, and what follows that. Their more distant future, regrettably, because of the wandering years when they're able to eventually enter Canaan. The last thing I want to share with you is, how is this a summary of everyone's walk before God? Everybody, by way of their lives, it's one of God's creatures intervening on our broadcast. How is this a beautiful summary of our lives? We're all going through the wilderness. We're all going through this period of going towards a better place. We get to these times of great difficulty, the places where the water is bitter, the places where we're socially distanced, the places where we have to stay separate, the places where we lose people, the places where things get tight, the places where our guilt catches up with us. And sometimes our reactions to those things are not what we would want them to be. Sometimes when the water is bitter, we say so. And we grumble instead of trust. We grumble against Moses. We grumble against all those who've been put before us as leaders. And we doubt that God would deliver us. We say to God, what are we going to drink? What are we going to do? How merciful God is. For this people that just crossed through the middle of the Red Sea in the greatest miracle executed on behalf of God's people to date in the book of Exodus. They get on the other side of the great body of water that the Lord commanded and then said, what do we drink? How do we live and walk and breathe in a world that God has created and then somehow doubt that He will provide out of this great beauty, out of this great place? Our God is merciful beyond comparison, because when we grumble, He does intervene on our behalf. He does provide for us. He makes a way available for us. The Lord has also given us statutes and rules, many of them similar to what the Jews were given, many of them new, many of them different, but all of them based on the same two principles. The principle of loving God. This is the voice, this is what happens when people love God in Exodus 15. They diligently listen to Him. They do what's right in His eyes. They give ear to His commandments. They keep all His statutes. People that love God care deeply about what He says and act accordingly. We understand this with significant others and spouses. When we love them, we can't get enough. And we do what's right by them. And we give ear to them. How much more so should we be that way with the Lord? The deal has always been the same with God. I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians. We trust in God to be a deliverer, to be a source of salvation, to be a place where comfort and peace and healing are had. God was that way then, and He remains that way now. And then at the end of our journey, aren't we promised a place very much like what's described here in Exodus 15 and verse 27? You don't expect to read of heaven in a story about the wilderness. But in the middle of a wilderness, a place with 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees is a place very much like heaven. Our own descriptions of heaven and the city of God and those things that we find in Revelation are filled with references to 12 and 7 and 10 and water and trees. At the end of our journey, this is what awaits us. The journey is going to be difficult. It's going to be trying. Unfortunately, we're going to grumble. We're going to make mistakes. But if we will never, ever abandon God, don't forsake Him, this is the place we can be. We can be in that place at the end of our journey where we're provided for, where we get to dwell with God and encamp by the water, the way Israel encamped by the water here. It's been enjoyable to study with you this evening. I look forward to studying with you in person. If that's not an available option, as it seems not to be in the near future, Lord willing, I want to continue with Exodus 16 next week, 16 and verse 1. What's beautiful about summary passages is that what follow is we get examples of those things. We don't read of every single instance of what happened between Egypt and Sinai, but what is included in the text tells us a great deal of what we need to know. It told Israel, it recorded their history in such a way that those who followed, those in the wilderness who followed, and those of us who are many centuries later reading of these things, we can understand something about God. We can get a greater understanding of Him and really an appreciation of who He is. We don't appreciate God enough. And the Exodus account really, for my own sake, is causing me to appreciate God and to see God for who He is and to see us for who He is and understand we need Him so very badly. And He is so merciful and so kind. And love is the only response I can think of to that mercy. It's been good to be with you this evening. I look forward to being with you in person or online, whichever comes next time we're able to study together. May God bless each one of you. I pray that the Lord would allow us to make sound decisions and we can do so according to his word and by his principles, and we can trust in him. I pray that we not grumble the way Israel grumbled here. The water might be bitter, but let us not lose our trust in God. Thank you.